Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Well, it might not be afternoon when you're watching this, but it's afternoon for me, Sunday afternoon, in fact. So today I'm going to share with you how you write your infographic. Although we're emphasizing visuals in this class, you're journalists, so we expect you also to create an infographic that is well written. And I'm going to tell you today how to do that. Remember, you're journalists, period. You come to this class because most of you come to this class because you're journalism majors. So this is a good time to start writing and thinking like a journalist. You're thinking like a journalist when you develop your idea, which, as we have emphasized, needs to be local and narrow and newsworthy. But your work in your infographic needs to be well written, concise, and copy edited. Information that's included in every infographic. A title for your infographic. A title entices the reader. A summary tells the reader or the viewer what the infographic is about and why it's important. You need to give your readers a reason to look at your infographic if it's not implicit. Then there's the copy for your infographic, and that's the actual information that goes with your graphics. And very importantly, sources. An infographic starts with a good title. There are a lot of ways to write a title for an infographic, but the key thing is you need to write a title that will entice the reader. Clever is great, and some people excel at writing clever titles, and if that's you, good for you, because that will help make you more employable. It also shows that you've put thought into your writing and your title. SEO is essential, search engine optimization. Now, Google it will dive into the copy. So if somebody happens to be Googling an infographic on voter turnout, they're going to go to the image page and find a ton of infographics that are about that, even if it's not necessarily in the title. But ideally, you want your title to be something that will come up in a Google search. So you just have to think about obvious words that aren't so off topic in trying to be clever, for example, that people won't find it. You want to keep your title short, but SEO is most important. And remember, when it comes to your infographic, you're going to be designing this title. So if you make the title too long, that makes it harder to design. Most titles for infographics are just a few words. I'll show you some examples here in a second that are more than a few words, but also a few words and are well designed. Now here's a longer title that a student created for an infographic in the spring. How likely are students to vote in the 2020 presidential election? She asks a question, in fact, and remember, when you propose your idea for your infographic, we are asking you to propose it as a question. In this case, the student actually wrote the question into the title of our infographic. So you can imagine a reader Googling this very topic. How likely are students to vote in the 2020 presidential elections? And if they did, this graphic would come up. Here's a clever title, but that is also very much focused on what the infographic is about. This is another infographic created by Claudia Garcia in the spring. She calls it Brain Fuel for Studying. Now, this infographic is about the best foods to fuel your brain, to give you focus and energy and during studying. She could have said, great foods for studying. Okay, but brain fuel for studying uses a metaphor. Food is fuel, right? And it's clever, but it's also on point. So this is an ideal clever title that would also be search engine optimized. So after the title, the next very, very important piece of your infographic is the summary. The summary can act more like a subhead that just explains the title, but the ideal summary has information in it. It tells the reader what the infographic is about. If it's not implicit, it needs to tell the reader why they should care. A good summary gets people to read your infographic because it's making them understand why the infographic is important. And you can include sources in your infographic, but it's not essential to put them there. Some sources cited in your summary can make your infographic more credible. But the most important thing is that you're going to have sources at the bottom of your infographic. I'm going to back up for a second and look at the summary for the infographic on how likely students are to vote. Research reveals there may be hope for student participation in the upcoming 2020 presidential election. Now, this is a good summary, but I'm going to just offer a perspective on how this might have been made just a little bit stronger. And that would have been to compare voter turnout in the last presidential election in 2016 among students to what's anticipated for the 2020 election. So if in 2016 voter turnout among students was only 50%, but now because of the nature of this upcoming election, that has changed. And in this case, it says 65% of students say they are very likely to vote. That provides a useful comparison and statistic in the summary that might tell the reader why they should read this infographic. Here's an infographic that a student created in the spring, and Julia Ermiger, and it's about plastic specifically. Let's talk trash. Now, we're talking about summaries here, but let's talk about this title for a second. Let's talk trash is a great metaphor because, of course, when we're talking trash, it means we're putting something down, right? But in the case of this infographic, which is about trash and specifically about plastic, talking trash takes on another meaning. This title might not be search engine optimized, but if someone were to be searching for infographics on this topic, it would come up because of the summary. Let's look at the summary. Americans alone produce about 10.5 million tons of plastic waste every year. A startling statistic, 10.5 million tons. This infographic shows what plastic items we throw away the most and what it all adds up to in just 1 year. Now, this is a really, really strong infographic that this student created. But to take it just a tiny bit further journalistically and in terms of writing, one of the things that might have made this summary a little bit stronger is if she had found a way to compare 10.5 million tons to something that we can understand. Perhaps 10.5 million tons would be enough plastic to fill Arrowhead Stadium or 3 Arrowhead stadiums. If you can find a useful comparison, then that makes the amount even clearer and more compelling to the reader. But again, this is a very strong summary because it includes a startling statistic. And this statistic helps the reader understand why this is an important infographic and why they should read it. This was a super strong infographic from the spring done by William Crow. Does playing games mean game over? The video game industry is one of the fastest growing industries of all time, but with the rise of video games in households across the world every year, another question grows. How do video games affect our day-to-day lives, specifically the lives of students? In 2012, the National Survey of Student Engagement conducted a survey for first-year college students and their time spent with video games. In 2016, the American Psychiatric Association conducted a survey for young adults and connections to internet gaming disorders. The information below further illustrates their findings. Now, this is quite a few words for a summary, but what makes this especially strong is William really focuses in on the audience, and the audience in this case is college students. So he says it's one of the fastest growing industries, but then he asks the question, how does it affect the lives of students? It's very specific. The focus of his infographic is very clear. He's also citing his two main sources in the summary, but at the bottom of the infographic, he includes them also. He includes links to those sources. More on that in a second. So now for the copy of your infographic. So you've got a great title, you've got a summary that is telling the reader what the infographic is about and why that infographic is important and they should read it. Now you've got the copy in your infographic. And when I'm talking about copy, I'm talking about this. Here is the copy related to each one of these photos. I'm going to come back to this in a second. Keep your copy short. An infographic is to be seen more than read. Don't be tempted to create an infographic that is really just a story with illustrations. The illustrations are essential, and the illustrations are what you're explaining. The illustrations are not just highlighting your text. Writing concise is a challenge, but one of the ways to get to conciseness in an infographic or in writing copy is to use parallel structure. I'll explain that in a second. And to use bullets. Include facts in your copy and not your opinion. Remember, you're journalists here and you're doing reporting. So you're not going to be telling the reader what you think. Which leads to, you're not going to use I in your infographic. Think of yourselves as a reporter. So what you're not going to do is you're not going to say, I did some research. Why wouldn't you say I did some research? Because you're not an expert and you're not credible. If you say I did some research, it suddenly brings the credibility of your infographic down a notch, in a way that if you just present your research, makes it seem more credible. So back to this infographic on the Fujita scale. Understanding the different categories of tornadoes. This is a longish title, but it's crystal clear. This would be search engine optimized. Now, what we see here is, well, first of all, I'm going to take you through the summary because it sets up the text. Spring is a time of severe weather and, more importantly, tornadoes. Tornadoes are rapidly rotating columns of air that are in contact with both the surface of the earth and the cumulonimbus cloud. It is significant to know that tornadoes vary in intensity. They can be classified by the Fujita scale. This is a well-known scale that uses damage caused by a tornado and relates the damage to the fastest 1/4 mile wind at the height of the damaged structure. So this summary was absolutely essential in setting up the brief text she provides about tornadoes. And this student, by the way, is a meteorology major. So we've got EF10, EF1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This is from last spring, so she could not, of course, have provided original photos. As we're requiring this semester, we're requiring you to have 3 original photos. Last spring, in my class at least, I allowed students to find illustrations as long as they were not copyrighted images, and to use them in their infographic. But the copy is really great. And the way the copy is set up is very much part of the design. We have on every first line here the tornado. On the second line of each one of these, we have the strength of the tornado. And on the third line, she has put the miles per hour that this tornado goes. So, and then bulleted: damage to chimneys, branches broken off of trees, shallow rooted trees split, damaged signs. Notice that she does not have more than 4 bullet points on any of these. The sentences are short. They're sentence fragments, and because they're sentence fragments, because essentially she's providing a list, she does not put periods at the end of each bullet. You don't put periods at the end of a bullet unless it's a complete sentence. Now, this copy, in the way it's written, but also the way it's designed, makes this information accessible to readers. They don't have to think about what they're looking at. It's intuitive. And the best infographics, the way they're designed and written, makes processing of them intuitive. You can go online and find tons of infographics that have too many words, that are too long, and they're not intuitive. I've talked in another lecture about how to do charts and graphs. That's another thing we talk about. Make them simple. Don't make them so complex that people have to spend a lot of time figuring them out. This infographic on how the University of Kansas handled reimbursements in the spring is not using bullets, but notice that the copy is still relatively short. We've got dining, housing, parking, and transit. Parallel structure in each one of these headings. She's not saying dining in one title and in another saying, here's how they handled housing. She is using labels. These labels, all designed at the same size, by the way, allow the reader's eye to pop down through the graphic and know what they're looking at. And then the copy itself is still brief. Unused dining dollars will roll over to the fall 2021 school year. All students who purchased a gold, silver, or bronze dining plan are eligible for this rollover, etc. She doesn't have more than 3 sentences in each one of these little copy blocks. I would like to think that this is about as long as you want to get with copy on your infographic. Sources. You have to include the sources in your infographic. Those sources tell the reader that you are not making up your facts. You can just use website addresses, or you can use a citation of what the source is itself. So backing up here to William, he cited 2 sources here, but at the bottom of the infographic, he also has the web addresses. Here's an infographic that was about recycling information. Recycling waste. And at the bottom, the student has all of her sources. And in this case, she had 1, 2, 3, 4 sources. In addition to her own Instagram survey, we're not letting you do surveys this year, or this fall. However, she backed up her small survey with 4 sources of information. You can do as much research as you want. You can use 1 source, but sometimes more sources, but sometimes you'll require more sources, and more is better. The more sources you have, the more credible your infographic seems. Here is a student's infographic about how students in the Sunflower State stack up in their amounts of debt. So the information He doesn't include web addresses, but he provides the source of information. The Kansas City Business Journal, which is a publication published out of Kansas City about business, as the name implies, and the United States Department of Education website. Remember, there's a ton of good data through the U.S. government, census, and other websites. Department of Education, Department of Health and Human Services, Food and Drug Administration, Center for Disease Control, and on and on. You want to write for your audience. So we're saying that your infographic has to be for a local audience. What does that mean? Well, that audience might be students. I imagine for a lot of you, that audience might be KU students, but it might be somewhat beyond KU students. If you were going to design an infographic about KU basketball, and I kind of want to warn you away from that, by the way, because images, you can't take pictures of basketball players. You can't, you're going to be limited. You're going to find it extremely challenging to illustrate a graphic about KU sports. However, if you were going to do one on KU basketball, obviously that's going to be of interest to KU students, but it's going to be of interest to people beyond KU students. But what are you asking yourself when you're writing for your audience? You need to keep that audience at the front of your mind. You have to say to yourself, what terms is my audience going to need to find? Do you need to spell out acronyms? Kansan style, the University Daily Kansan style, is to spell out the University of Kansas on every first reference. I'll talk about copy editing in a second. If you know how to use an Associated Press style guide, if you used one in high school, if you have access to one, I strongly encourage you to use it. But you need to think, what terms do I need to define for my audience? What acronyms do I need to spell out? And do I need to include state names? And my answer to that is yes, actually, no matter who you're designing this for. If you use the word Lawrence, you need to use the word Kansas, because although you're creating this for a local audience, someone may Google and find your graphic in a portfolio, because you're going to create portfolio quality work with this. They may find it and not know where Lawrence is. So while you're creating it for a local audience, also imagine that someone across the United States or across the world may find it. What do they need to know? So remember this graphic about tornadoes. Notice how in her summary, she defines the Fujita scale that uses damage caused by tornado and relates to the damage to the fastest quarter-mile wind at the height of the damaged structure. Now, I would say, for me, if I am in this audience and interested in this, I'm not quite sure what she means by relates to the damage to the fastest quarter-mile. So if she were to do this over as an editor, as her editor, I would ask her to define that a little more clearly. But nevertheless, she defines and explains what the Fujita scale is. If she had just used the enhanced Fujita scale in her title, no one would know what she's talking about. This is from an infographic about how much time University of Kansas students and many others were spending on screens once they were working at home during COVID. Switching to online classes during a digital era has led to increased screen time for University of Kansas students and many others. So now we're focusing on KU students, but we're really broadening it to students. Here's what you need to know about managing screen use while working from home amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. So this summary focuses on the audience, but it definitely, notice it tells the audience why this graphic is important to them. Here's what you need to know about managing screen usage while working from home. So local interest, and related to the audience in the summary. Brain fuel for studying. Now that everyone's staying home, snacking has become one of the most popular activities among college students. However, not every snack is good for heavy academic work. Here are 6 snacks that will provide a healthy and lasting source of energy for big projects, midterms, and finals. Focused on the audience, written in a conversational style, written concisely, and written to the audience. And finally, you need to copy edit your work. Now, I know that some of you in 300, you haven't had an editing class yet, and some of you have come from the journalism school, from high school journalism programs, so you understand about copy editing. Others of you may not. You may be in programs and taken other classes where teachers aren't as concerned about the quality of your copy, but in the journalism school, we are very much focused on the quality of your copy editing. Now if you're saying to yourself, I have no idea how to copy edit. Yes, you do. First of all, if you have an Associated Press style guide, use it. If you don't have an Associated Press style guide, the main thing is you need to be consistent. Don't spell out a state name in one place and abbreviate it in another. Don't use percent signs in one place and not in another. If you're using parallel structure with bullets, make sure you don't have periods at the end of some sentences while not at the end of others. Check that words that should be capitalized are. I see this a lot when I look at infographics. Students are not focusing on, is this a proper noun? Or more commonly, they're capitalizing things that don't need to be capitalized. When in doubt, look it up. Have someone, and by someone I mean not you, proof your work. I find typos in my work all the time. After I've written something, I know I have typos in emails I send you because I don't have a copy editor to read my emails. So I am trying to proof my own emails and get them out, or announcements, and I cringe every time I see that I've made a mistake. I do try to go back and fix them, but it's proof that even though I spent many years as an editor and I have been editing copy for the 30 years I've been at KU, I am still going to make mistakes. The key here is don't read your own work. Now, when I say somebody and not you, I recommend it's somebody who maybe is a journalism major, someone who's attuned to the kinds of mistakes that you need to look for. Also, write your text in Word and cut and paste it into your infographic. Why? Because if you try to write in your infographic, you're going to end up being more focused on formatting and the design than you will be on the words. Now, if you do it in InDesign will spell check. I don't know about Canva. I don't know if Canva spell checks or not. But write the copy in Word, which will spell check, which will point up your grammatical errors. And then once you've finished it there, you can cut and paste it into your infographic. Now, if the copy doesn't fit the spaces you've provided, then you have to edit it. But start by writing your text in Word. As I said, you can't see your own mistakes. You need to look for misspellings, typos, and words that might be left out of sentences. When we write a sentence, we know what it says. So it's very easy for us to read a word into a sentence that's not actually there. So that's a key thing to look for. In my class, I'm not sure about Eric, but you're going to lose 2 points for each typo or misspelling that I find. And when I add I find, sometimes I overlook them and you get off the hook. But if I find 1 or 2 or 10, I'm going to take off 2 points for each one. So it behooves you, behoove being a word I love, to make sure you do not have mistakes. Also, you make this thing, it's got mistakes, you put it in your portfolio, somebody who want to employ you for an internship, I guarantee you they're going to see it. They're going to see those mistakes. And you don't want that. You want to have flawlessly edited work.